Well, welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm going to be talking about, basically I'm going to be talking about a project we did at the library dealing with a Google Analytics project. Now, the library has a pretty robust web presence, and we use Google Analytics to track a lot of things. And one of these things is a project that I'm going to discuss today. Just a little bit of background so you kind of can know where I'm coming from. I'm actually a librarian, and I've only been at Yale for about a year and a half. I'm the assessment librarian. This project involved working with systems folks to sort of come up with a robust analytics dashboard for a particular part of our website. Okay. So to sort of give you a little bit of an introduction, we wanted to set up a web analytics dashboard for a particular segment of our website called Libguides. Libguides is a library software CMS program that Yale Library uses that basically enable library staff, basically librarians, to publish websites on our site. It's very easy to use. It's designed specifically for libraries, and it's something that Yale Library has been using for about 2.5 years. It's really been a heavily used product at Yale Library, so at this point we will have over 400 subject guides within this system and over 100 staff that are responsible for publishing and editing and managing these sites. So that's a lot of people to serve. All right. So here's a sort of an example of a LibGuide website. A LibGuide is basically, this is a subject guide for business resources. It's set up by our School of Management librarian, and it's a site for business and management research topics. As you can see, it's a website with a lot of nested pages. All of those tabs represent specific areas of business and specific resources that are specialized for that business. It's sites basically designed to help people to navigate a really complex information landscape. And it's meant to highlight a lot of the Yale Library's licensed resources. These are things that you can't get free on the web. We license them within Yale, and we want to make sure people are using them. So for example, on the business research and the business side of things, one thing like that is Bloomberg. If anybody knows what a Bloomberg terminal is, we actually offer that at the School of Management, and we have LibGuides devoted to helping people use that particular resource. So like I said, we have over 400 of these guides, but we wanted people who were publishing them to understand a little bit about how people were using them. So as a result, we had a lot of questions about these guides and how they were being used. So for example, we really wanted to know who in the Yale community was actually using the guides. We wanted to know how people were getting to our sites. We wanted to know if people were engaged with our site, because that's something that we're very interested in as a library, to make sure that we're constructing our resources and our web presence to get the information to our people in the best way possible. And finally, we wanted to understand what links they were following. And this is something that the library is always really interested in, because we have an enormous set of licensed electronic resources, but we're always trying to maintain a good balance of new resources and existing resources with limited funds. We can't buy everything, and so we're always figuring out what are people actually using and what are they not using, what are they not finding to be valuable. All right. So again, a lot of these things can be answered with Google Analytics data. And Google Analytics is a great product. So we have had Google Analytics set up on our website for the entire time that we've been using it. But we've used this data in a very limited way, and we really wanted to get more engaged with this data. As a couple of pros, Google Analytics data is really comprehensive. There are hundreds of metrics and dimensions to use for analysis. It's also super customizable. There are a lot of things that you can customize within Google Analytics to make the product even better, using custom dimensions and event tracking to figure out what people are actually doing on your website. However, there are a bunch of cons associated with Google Analytics as well. First of all, it's super complicated to introduce to new users. If you are an experienced Google Analytics sort of an analyst person, you have a lot of experience and you kind of understand how those metrics how it's reflecting behavior in your website, but there's so much data there that it's almost overwhelming to a brand new user. And finally, and this is the most important thing, how do we get all of these Google Analytics reports that we have available to 100+ users? The access management piece of Google Analytics is really cumbersome, and we're already managing too many people in that system, and most of those people have no experience using Google Analytics and probably shouldn't be in there anyway. So that's a real problem. All right. Just to get an idea of our Google Analytics site, this is our Google Analytics site for our Libguides. And as you can see, this is just one report. This is a site content report for our Libguides. And you see a lot of data here, but I'm not sure what the best data is to present. And you can also see it's really complicated because our guides are organized by sort of site title. So the business resource is one guide. The problem is one guide contains tons of URLs because a lot of them are multiple pages. And as you can see, when you're just looking at a standard out-of-the-box Google Analytics report, trying to hunt and peck for your guide is actually pretty difficult. You also have to go all over the place to get at the different pieces of information that you want. For example, if I want to get to information about where people are coming from to access our site, that's kind of in the acquisitions report. But as you can see, I have to go to a different place. I have to know that it's in the acquisition all traffic channels guide to get the best report. So that's, again, this is the problems we were encountering trying to figure out how to introduce this to our people, the people who are managing these guides. We did a lot of, the Google Analytics team and we did a lot of sort of planning and analysis of our existing Google Analytics data to figure out the best way to bring that data out. And one of the things we discovered is that we really needed to do a lot of configuration work to get the data that we really needed. So we did a lot of work before we even started building our dashboard to configure our Google Analytics data properly. And one of the key things we did was we set up something called custom dimensions. Has anybody here used custom dimensions in their Google Analytics site? Okay. Custom dimensions is an interesting tool. They're in the sort of out-of-the-box Google Analytics, and this is something that's available in the Universal Analytics. So if you're still on old version of Google Analytics, you have to migrate up to the new one to get this. But custom dimensions are basically, you get 20 variables, and you have the ability to fill those variables any way you want. So basically what we decided to do is that we decided we needed to add a variable that basically captured our site title. That way we would have that variable available in all of our custom reports, and that would allow us to organize all of the pages within a site into one place. So we basically had to set up a custom dimension to record the LibGuide title. That was key to this whole project to get this set up. Setting up a custom dimension is relatively straightforward within Google Analytics. As you can see over on the left-hand side there, you basically go into the profiles area of Google Analytics, and you can set up a custom dimension and custom metrics. There's also custom metrics. We didn't do anything in there. There's a lot of other things that you can do. And I set up a LibGuide title. I set it up to be at the hit level. That's the very basic level of Google Analytics that makes the data work really well across all the different dimensions. And the second thing I had to do is I also had to do something on our website that captured data, the LibGuide title, into a JavaScript variable that I could feed into Google Analytics. So this was a two-step process. And once we figured this out, and it took a few weeks to get us to this point, it really kind of changed the game as far as developing a robust dashboard. All right. So finally, this gave us a lot of power, and there's a lot of things that you can do within Google Analytics to create custom dashboards and reports. So at this point, we were exploring that. We were like, well, let's see if we can set up a custom dashboard within Google Analytics, but we were still running into that access management problem. It was just still too complicated. So at the same time, we were just beginning to start to explore Tableau, and Tableau sort of offered an interesting opportunity. Because what we really wanted is this, and I'm going to show you what we really wanted. We wanted a dashboard that looked like this. A dashboard that basically pulled out the most important bits of Google Analytics data, gave us the ability to filter and configure it so that the School of Management librarian can look at her business sites, and the arts librarian can look at the art sites. A lot of librarians manage multiple sites, and trying to configure that was very difficult to think about when we were doing Google Analytics report. This basically means you can do self-service. I go there, I'm interested in looking at a site, I can pull it down and get it, and that's what the information is. So basically, To be a really effective dashboard, we needed to have the parameters. That allows the viewer to just come in, select the date range and the site, and get the information that they want. It pulls out the key metrics that we thought were important at the time, and this is something that we're having a constant conversation about, but we can pull out those key metrics and bring it right to the forefront, and so they don't have to filter through a lot of data. They get the key pieces of data right away. And you also get engaging visual elements and visual reports that we think are useful for analyzing the use of this particular product. So this is what we wanted to do. And so we discovered that we could do this really easily using Tableau. Now, Tableau is a great product because you can pull in a lot of data from a lot of different sources. So one thing that gave Tableau an advantage is it has a built-in Google Analytics connector. That built-in Google Analytics connector uses the Google Analytics API to bring in data, and it makes it very easy to do that. And to do that, getting started with Tableau, you do that starting at the point where you're creating a new workbook and you're creating a new interface. So this is where you would get started. If you've been working with Tableau a lot, you probably have been working a lot and playing with the in a file section, but we're going to explore some of the on the server connections. And the Google Analytics is one of the options there. If you select Google Analytics, you are basically prompted at that point. It connects out to Google. You authenticate with your Google ID, and that allows you to pull in data and metrics directly from your instance of Google Analytics. All right. This is what that looks like. So basically, once you've authenticated with Google Analytics, you're given a lot of options. And let me tell you that they might seem limiting at the beginning, but you don't have to necessarily worry about that right away. And that's one of the great things about Tableau. But the first thing you really need to do is connect it to the right instance. Now, the library Google Analytics presence is pretty complicated. We have a lot of different server products, and we have a lot of different stuff feeding our website. And so we have a lot of different views set up to help to sort that stuff out. So basically what I did is I created a Libguides view of our Google Analytics data. That basically just portions all that data into one little container. So I set that up on step 1, which is basically the account information. And that really mirrors, if you're familiar with Google Analytics, the 3 different columns in that initial Google Analytics thing, the sort of the properties, the account, and the profile is the sort of the nitty-gritty part. Then there's a date range. Now, like Google Analytics, it kind of defaults to a 30-day date range, but there are a lot of different options there that you can do. So you sort of figure that out as you go along. Here's, in this example, I just did the last 30 days, but you can pull in more data if you want. Keep in mind, Google Analytics holds a lot of data. So if you select a really large date range and it's asking you to bring in millions of rows, it's not going to actually do that. It will start to do some sampling, and it will tell you that it's doing it. But keep that in mind if you have a really big Google Analytics data site, that's going to happen. And finally, you select the 7 dimensions and 10 measures to sort of get you started. Now, that seems very limiting at the beginning because, there's hundreds of dimensions and measures in Google Analytics, and you may want to have more than that in your dashboard. But I can tell you that as you get started, it's really good to get started with a sort of a defined set of parameters, especially as you're sort of learning how to create reports in Tableau. But the great thing about Tableau is you don't have to be limited to one data connector source in a workbook or in a dashboard. So if you have a more complicated set of data that you want to bring in from Google Analytics, you just create a second connector, and then the workbook connects to both of them. And as long as you have a variable within the 2 that can connect them together, you're set. You don't have to worry about it. So don't necessarily be worried about that limit right away. You can get around it in a lot of different ways. You can select a segment to filter your data. This is very important from the Google Analytics side of things. There's a lot of ways you can segment your data. This dashboard is very simple, and it's basically just hits and visits. So I'm not getting really complicated there. And then I could just create a name for it, and then you can get started. At that point, you have a Google Analytics sort of presence in Tableau, and you can start to build a report. So as you can see, I got started, I brought in my data, and one of the first things I wanted to do was I wanted to create a basic report and to begin the process of setting up the interactivity. At this point in the discussion, I'm going to migrate away from Google Analytics a little bit, and I'm going to get into some nitty-gritties with Tableau. So basically that's what I'm going to be going through for the rest of the session. All right, so this is an interactive dashboard. That means that whenever I do something at the top, the report below is going to change. So that's what I wanted to have happen in my Tableau instance. All right, so now you can kind of see what happened when I brought the data into Tableau. All of the things that were identified as Google Dimensions are listed at the top corner under the Dimensions pane. You see all the measures down below. Those are the 10 measures I selected for this particular instance. And the first thing that I did to get started is I replicated a Google Analytics report, basically the report you always see when you first log into Google Analytics, which is basically your daily page view activity. That's all this is. It's the simplest possible Google Analytics report. It's basically the date. So I double-click the date, and then I double-click the page views, and magically, it pretty much happened magically because Tableau does that. It's pretty smart. It tries to come up with the best possible graph for the data that you have. I didn't really have to do anything else. I got a line graph, and that's exactly what I wanted. All right, but at this point, it is a very static thing. So I brought in Google Analytics data for my entire Libguides view. That's every single guide in our 400-plus guide, what do you call it, your group. This is everything. This is the entire traffic. What I want to be able to do is I want to select the name of my guide and have the traffic reflect just that guide. So at that point, I'm going to get started developing the parameters and the filters to get that to happen. All right, so step one, well, the real first step is to have a report. Step one is really to have a report. But step one to get started with sort of adding interactivity to your Google Analytics dashboard is to set up a few fields. The first thing I did was I set up a calculated field based on custom dimension 1. As I said before, I created this custom dimension to bring that data into Google Analytics. When I brought the Google Analytics data into Tableau, it very helpfully just calls it custom dimension 1. It doesn't have a good name. So this is basically just a calculated field to give it a meaningful name. And names are really important in Tableau, and they're really important when you're developing dashboards because dashboards are complicated. There's often tons of reports and tons of views of things, so if you don't have good naming conventions right away, you're going to get confused really quickly. So I wanted to set myself up right, and I wanted to get started with meaningful names, so basically I just renamed that dimension to Libguide title. That way I knew exactly what it was, and as I use it throughout all the reports, it makes a lot more sense. That was basically a right-click, create calculated field, and it's not even a calculated field that has any calculations in it. It's really simple. It was that easy to do. All right. So once you have a calculated field with Libguide title, now I want to set up my parameter. Now your parameter is basically the thing that allows a viewer to ask a question, and then and data will hopefully appear that matches the answer to their question. Setting up a parameter in Tableau is fairly straightforward. And if you've gone to any of the lunch and learns and some of the trainings, they should have gone through this process. But I'm going to sort of review it in a little bit more detail here because what I did is I created a parameter for my Libguide title that allows me basically to develop a pull-down menu that has the list of all the names of the Libguides in it. So there are 4 parameter data types that are available. So when you basically right-click anywhere on that left-hand side, and you get an option to create parameter. You can do it right from scratch. Do create parameter. You have to select a data type. The data type for this obviously is string, but you can also do numerics, booleans, and date times. My dashboard includes date times and string parameters at this point. All right. So I created a string parameter. But I wanted it to be a list. I didn't want to type in values. There's 400 guides. I don't have time for that. And also, it's something that's dynamically changing all the time, so you want to set yourself up so that you can refresh your data periodically. So I wanted to make sure it was feeding the values in so that it would always have current data. So I set it up as a list, and then you select this Add from Field. Once you select Add from Field, you can basically select that new calculated field that says Libguide title, and it will come in and populate all of your values. You can do some configuration work. You can delete things that might not be, might be messy data. You're bringing in Google Analytics data. I can promise you, you're going to have some messy data that you might want to just get rid of and say, please don't look at that. That's just mistakes. So I had a little bit of that I cleaned up. But for the most part, it's really straightforward. I just pull that data in. I click OK, and now I have a parameter. And that's great. But the parameter right now doesn't do anything. The parameter is just a parameter. It's not linked to my report yet. So the third step is to basically figure out a way to link your parameter to a report. And you do that using a filter. So basically the filter is the connector that brings the two things together. Going back to creating a calculated field, you create a calculated field, and here's where naming comes in again. Libguide title filter. That's what I wanted it to be because that's what I want to refer to it as I go forward. Libguide title filter basically says, make the parameter match the title. That's all I want. And when you have a filter like that, it's basically a true-false. So either the two things match or the two things don't. So once you create that parameter and you bring it into the filters card, by default you get that true-false thing. You want to make sure that you select true, and at that point your parameter is a filter, it's linked to your report, and basically at that point it's working. To see it in action, make sure to right-click on your parameter and select Show Parameter Control. That basically makes the parameter appear on the Tableau desktop, and that allows you to play with it and test it to make sure it's working. And at that point, you have a working parameter. So now I have the LibGuide title up above. That's the About the Library LibGuide. And down here, I have something called Aeon documentation with a very different pattern of page view activity. So you kind of see an example of a guide that's used a lot and a guide that's not used very much at all right there. But the parameter is working. I know it's working, and that's a good thing. Now, I set all this stuff up after just doing one report. The great thing about parameters is that once you have it set up for one report, as long as it's applicable, you can keep reusing it on all the other reports that are in your dashboard. So once you get it working once, you're in good shape. That means that you're going to be able to make it work for other reports. So it actually does write once and run everywhere. It actually works in this case. But like I said, make sure to have good naming conventions. I tried to be very deliberate in the way that I was naming things. I can say that when I was doing this, I had watched a very detailed tutorial about Tableau dashboards, and they had some advice in that tutorial that I basically used. So when something is a filter, I say that it's a filter, because as you're starting to do calculated fields, they start to populate and fill up your dimensions area. If you have a lot of dimensions and a lot of calculated fields, it gets hard to sort through things. So as you can see here, I'm not going to go through it step by step, but I also created parameters and filters for the date range. Setting those up are very similar. You use your date parameter function. You select it as a date. You have a lot of options that way. But once you do the parameters, the way that you set it up on a report really works the same no matter what type of parameter it is. So once I did that select date range, you move it to the filters card, it is a true-false value as well. Keep in mind that as you're developing a dashboard and you're thinking about your interactive elements, some of those parameters may behave a little bit differently. So you can actually have parameters where you allow people to type in values and be even more specific about things. I tried to keep it pretty basic, where I wanted to make sure it was pull-down menus and date range sort of controls. I didn't want to have too many options on my particular case. All right. The other way that you can add a lot of functionality to your dashboard is by using actions. So once you've started creating now, at that point I had created a whole bunch of reports and I'd actually set up a dashboard. You see my parameters are up at the top, and I had a lot of reports within the dashboard. But a dashboard action allows you to make the dashboard even more interactive. For example, in that user location pie chart, basically, there's two types of locations that I have identified there, and New Haven and other. The purpose of that is we were really interested in who in the Yale community were using our LibGuides, and we thought that was a good approximation of that. So we have it. It's basically just based on the city field in Google Analytics. We bring it in, and we just divide it into two possible cities. It's New Haven or everybody else. So it's a very simple report. But if you want to click on just New Haven, all of the report elements basically just look at the New Haven segment. So everything changes dynamically. And you can do that in all of the different types of reports. That adds another layer to the dashboard, allowing people to look at things more granularly. The other thing that I have set up as a dashboard action is URL links. There are some reports in my dashboard, and we'll look at that in a little bit more detail very soon. But there are reports basically that say, all right, there's stuff on the LibGuide that are links out to electronic resources, to books in our catalog, things like that. I want to know what it is people are clicking on. So I have an event tracking system set up in Google Analytics, and I'm bringing in the data to report on it. But the report sometimes is not very clear about what that stuff is. The URLs can be very long, they can be very confusing, but the librarians can actually click on a link. So something that's really popular, they can click on it, and it'll actually open up to show them what the resource is that people are clicking on in their guide. It just adds another layer of interactivity, but it's also really useful if there's a lot of links to things where the URLs are really not very clear about what they are, which does happen with a lot of these sort of library resources. All right. So here's Tableau. Here's the Tableau dashboard in the dashboard workspace in the Tableau client. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff happening here. There's a lot of reports that are up at the top. You can see all the different reports. There's 12 of them at that point. There's 12 different tabs in the workbook. There is also different data elements and layout stuff that's happening there. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but creating a dashboard is very easy. Creating a dashboard that looks good takes a little bit more work. It takes a little bit more work with the layout features of Tableau, sort of sketching out how you want to design it is a good way of doing it. That's kind of what I did. I sort of wireframed it before I even did anything, and then figuring out ways to have things lay out properly. And it took a little bit of work, but all of that is very possible using those sort of those elements, and those are sort of listed right here. These are the way that you lay things out in the Tableau dashboard. As you can see, there are a lot of reports in this particular dashboard, and figuring out the best way to organize it took a little bit of work and a little bit of feedback from other users. Once you're on the dashboard page, if you can go into the dashboard actions, these are all the actions that are currently associated with this particular dashboard. As you can see, I have some filters. There's basically some active sort of filters that you can click on something and it changes all the data to reflect just the data in that segment. And then I have a bunch of hyperlinks that sort of allow people to go out to other websites. It's fairly straightforward. All right. So I have 12, like I said, I have 12 reports basically in my dashboard, but let's talk about what kinds of reports they are right now. There are basically reports. They're like really reports. There are charts that are very visible right away. And then I have something called summary data. So let me just talk about the different elements. And this, again, when I walked through a detailed Tableau dashboard workshop, this is where I learned about some of these different elements. I did not invent any of this. I sort of basically copied something that I saw online. All right, so the first thing is a summary element. The summary elements are basically even simpler than the page views, a dynamic line report, are these sort of summary reports. Because if you look at the dashboard in the workbook area, it's basically one value. It's just one value, the total number of page views, with a lot of filters and actions associated with it. That links that value to all the different elements that might happen as people filter and dynamically change the report. But the report itself is one number, and that number is basically a part of that dashboard number. When you see it in the dashboard live, you just see the number, and then there's just a text element next to it that I added to it. So I didn't do it within the report. I added the text element to the dashboard. So that's not even in the report. So I have about 5. I have 5 of those. I had originally 8 or 9, but we really winnowed it down as we were looking at our data, trying to come down to the most interesting pieces of data. And we decided that we really wanted to sort of get general traffic and engagement. And the general traffic gives you the page views, unique page views and users, and then bounce rate and seconds on page was sort of the best elements we could figure out that told how engaged people were in the site. So those are the 2 things that you're seeing there. Yes?
Are these page views across month or year? Or
Oh, I'll show you. I'll show you.
In the dashboard, how do they know?
In the dashboard, how do they know? Well, the way that they know. So over here, I have just the number. How they know is all of these different filters.
Okay.
So basically, when I select a particular guide, that number changes. That number, that 5,000 number, is probably associated, because I did a lot of these screenshots, with the About the Library page. It's sort of a landing page, and it gets a lot of traffic. So I use that as my default page. So, but if I change the parameter, if I do it in the desktop, that number will change. So I change to a different guide to get a different number of page views. There's also a date parameter. So if I change the dates, that number will change as well. And I'll show you that live. All right. Then I have sort of a traditional report. This is not a visual report at all. It's more like just this Excel spreadsheet report. And what this is a report of all the different subpages in a guide and all of the detailed analytics associated with that subpage. So again, when I select a page, if I do business resources, those subpages, some of them will say international companies or mergers and acquisitions. Those will be the subpages. So that's what that report is, and then the individual stats for that particular segment of the page. I have another database element in there called Libguide page title. So there's the Libguide title, and then there's Libguide page title. So that's the way that you think about everything collapses up into that bigger container. This is the very detailed information. And what happens when I display it in the dashboard, this is what it looks like. It looks really just like that, but it has, because I've limited the container, you get the scroll bar. So depending on how many pages are in a guide, and some guides can be really very page heavy, some of them don't have as many. You have to scroll down to get all of the data. And finally, of course, you have your charts. And your charts are really just basic reports that have been visualized. And I have a bunch of them, a couple of pie charts. I have a line graph. There's also a bar graph down below as well. All right. So that's all the different elements of the reports. Now, this is sort of a screenshot of our actual guide. Now, you can actually go to that website if you have a computer with you and look at it. And we'll look at it live as well. Now, when I developed this, we did this project starting in, started in January and February, exploring this with Google Analytics. The Tableau thing happened very quickly, but the Tableau development side of it was happening really quickly. Didn't really have a place to put it. Some of you might have just sat through site admin for server admin training for Tableau. That stuff's really, it's just beginning here at Yale. But talking with our IT director, and I was talking with the library IT director, I experimented and I published this on something called Tableau Public. So Tableau Public is a place where you are free to publish Tableau workbooks, the caveat being that the data is free and open to the world. So I needed to check to make sure it was okay to publish this data free and open to the world. And our library IT director said, yeah, go for it. We're not shy about any of this type of data. We're not shy about it. So we're like, all right, we'll do it. I mean, granted, most people aren't going to find it. It's hidden in a lot of stuff in Tableau Public. And so at that point, basically, we published this particular project onto Tableau Public as an experiment. And this is a beta project. It came out really well, and we think it's really functional. There's a lot of stuff we want to add to it, and we've been sort of doing outreach to our librarians to have them use it. But this is the first time a lot of them are interacting with this type of data, so it's been a really interesting project. But let me see if I can open up Tableau Public and get to the site. Give us a minute. All right. So like I said, this is free, and oh, wait a minute. Why did that happen? Oh, there it is. All right. So this is our live workbook. Give it a minute to load up. So the live workbook looks just like in my screenshots. You have a lot of different data elements. You see the summary elements, the text elements. And scrolling down, there's a little bit more data down here. You have your detailed report of all the different subpages associated. This is the About the Library page. That's our default sort of page that we're looking at. And then all of the links that people are actually clicking on, including website links and mail to links. So there's a lot of contact information on these sites. So we know how many times people have been looking at it. Now, you can dynamically change things here by just using the pull-down menu. So I'm going to change it to the Business Research Guide, which is the School of Management Guide, the other one that I featured in my screenshots. You're going to see something very different. You'll see all of the elements will change to show the new data. All right. So this is really showing spring semester worth of activity. 2/15 was basically the day that our custom dimension went live. We really can't do this report without a custom dimension. And as you know, if you do any configuration work in Google Analytics, it's only proactive. It's never retroactive. So if you establish a new custom dimension or a custom metric, it's only going to be active from the date that you've set it up going forward. But that was okay, because that meant that we got a good semester's worth of activity, and that was good. As you can see, you can get all the different metrics for this particular page. The summary up above really reflects everything, all of the subpages rolled up into one. You can kind of see the breakdown that mostly New Haven people use this guide. So as we were talking about as we talk about these analytics and what they mean and what librarians should take away from that, we would take away that this guide is really very well positioned for the community that it's designed for. So we think that's a good thing. It also has a relatively low bounce rate compared to a lot of our other guides. If you go through some of our guides, some of them have an extremely high bounce rate. That means people find them on Google, but because it's not relevant to them, they basically click away right away. All right, and then you have all the different subpages, and these are all the different subpages for the business guide. Now, with our interactive elements for Google Analytics, you can do some additional filtering. So I can go in and I can say, all right, so I'm only interested in things that are, let's do just referrals. So if I click on that, dynamically, as it's thinking, all of the numbers above, all of the page view activity, all of this stuff only refers to referral activity. And then you can click out of that to basically, to refresh the page again, say I want to get out of that, I want to see everything again. So interactive filter elements. The other thing that you can do, I have a filter set up so I can look at just the small segment of the site if I want to see other things about it. So if I just care about the, let's do the career business resources page. It's not as heavily used as the main page of the site. But as you can see, the main dashboard changes, but you get a much better idea of daily traffic activity to that site. But also, and this is more important, is to see what the outgoing links on that particular page are actually being used and how many times they've been clicked since the site data went live. The slider works. You can easily do that. And again, everything that you do is going to dynamically change it as you're going through on the site. And again, just to click out of it if you want to get out of it. Takes a minute. There you go. So a lot of interactivity, very easy for somebody to go in and look at their individual pages and get good data about what's happening on that particular page. All right, so let's go back here. All right. All right, give the system a minute. All right, so just before I take questions, I have some information about some of the resources that are available that I used as I was developing this particular dashboard. There's a Google Analytics, this is the LibGuide that's set up by Katie Bauer, one of the people who is helping with this particular Google Analytics group. She set up a very quick Google Analytics LibGuide. It basically has the calendar for these talks on it and a few resources there. We're starting to flesh that out a little bit, and I'm going to put this presentation up on that site for people to look at later if they want to. If you go to Tableau Public, if you go to that website that I showed you, if you want to see how this actually works, you also have the ability to download the workbook from the Tableau Public site. The workbook is free to download. You can tweak it. You can look at all the different innards of the Tableau workbook to see how it gets put together. It's a great way to learn. I've learned a lot by downloading Tableau workbooks and looking at some of that type of data. So I do recommend that as well. There's a bunch of resources on the Tableau site about specifically Tableau and Google Analytics. And so that's the URL that will get you to that information. There's a couple of web tutorials there. I also found some really good tutorials just on YouTube. I just Googled Tableau and Google Analytics, and I found a lot of really relevant tutorials out there given by consulting groups and things like that. So definitely partake of those resources if you can find them. And finally, Tableau 8, the official book. This is an ebook from the Safari ebook platform. We have this available from the library. If you go to that shortened URL, that'll get you right there. Keep in mind that the Safari, I use Safari all the time for tech books, but there is a limited number of licenses, so sometimes you get kicked out of it. So try again later if you have trouble doing that. We have a bunch of other ebook platforms, and some of them also have IT books. So keep your eye out on the library catalog, other Tableau books. I've noticed a lot more publications happening in that area. So if you go back and redo a search every once in a while, you might find something new from one of our other ebook platforms, as well as from Safari. All right. So at this point, I was going to wonder if anybody has any questions. We have about 15 more minutes until lunchtime.
So unless it's published publicly, it will be visible to whoever you assign?
It's visible to the entire world.
Oh, every report?
Everybody. Every report that we have. For this project, we said it was okay for this project to do that. To do that for this particular project. We would not do this for everything. We're going to be getting set up on the Tableau server here. We will get some data up there as well. For this particular project, because we really wanted to do this quickly, and we wanted librarians to have access to their spring semester's worth of data, this was the quickest way for us to do it, and everybody was on board with putting it on Tableau Public. So, yes.
I'm just trying to understand, was the data collected across single UA code? Or was it multiple UA codes?
We have only 2 UA codes. Let me see. I'm going to toggle back to the web here, and I can show you our Google Analytics setup here.
But when you were working on this project, was it just a single code or multiple codes that you were working across?
We have multiple codes. My project used only a single code, and I'm going to show you exactly. I don't want Yale. I want Google. I just want Google Analytics. Hold on as I authenticate. I can kind of show you our library's Google Analytics instance and how it's set up, and what exactly it is that I pulled out to do the Tableau data. Oh yeah, this is not me. That's okay. Are there any other questions while I'm getting this set up?
So how many times did you have to add the code? How many different pages?
Not very many. Not very many.
What's the underlying system?
Yeah, I'm going to show you that. So hold on a minute.
So we're sending users to a URL, or do they need Tableau?
Nope. Oh, you're right. There is an extra period. I am sending them to a URL. It is basically a published website, and it's just an interactive. They do not have to have Tableau Desktop to access those reports. They're all web-enabled reports. That's great. All right, so now I just want Google Analytics. All right, so this is this is what I have access to in the library. So we have 2 UA codes here. Let me make it bigger so it makes sense. All right. So I have access to something called HathiTrust. It's not important. It's not part of our website. It's something we have access to. All right, and so our UA code is right there, but we have the test code as well. So we're basically using 2 UA codes for all of our web properties, but we have all of these views set up for very particular portions of our website. And this is the view that I set up for Libguides. So that's the view that I'm pulling in using the Google Analytics connector. Now the Tableau Public site, that URL takes you to a public website. Once you publish that, it's basically available for people to consume. As consumers, they have the ability to filter by title, adjust date range, do all of the actions that I did in Tableau, but they do not have to understand Tableau or have Tableau desktop to access those reports. That was the other real powerful element of setting up a dashboard like that, especially when you're trying to publish data out to users who might not have access to any of those things. Other questions?
Have you thought about correlating this with search results? Or,
Yes. There's a lot. I mean, this was a beta project. We had very simple goals at the beginning, but we have a lot of more sophisticated things we want to do as we develop this project. Getting some information about search is a key part of that. We have webmaster tools set up to get more data for search, and there's also some search elements within Libguides that we can start to track as well. We're moving to a new Libguides platform, which is basically version 2 of it, so we're migrating that this summer. We did this project because we really wanted people to look at their usage data before we did the migration. So after we do that, we have a lot of things we want to do to track things on an ongoing basis. Having better controls over Libguides, more uniform access to certain things, but also maybe adding even more interactive elements. So we also want to set up event tracking for maybe viewing web videos, things like that. So there'll be more data that we're going to want to pull in. And also to be able to also have a couple of other data filters that make it a little easier for people to find all of their information. So I want to have a LibGuide author pull-down field. So I might have authored 10 LibGuides. I want to be able to filter through them a lot easier than I do right now. But also to group things together by subject area. So we can look at all of the science LibGuides together, all of the social science LibGuides together. Now that kind of stuff is going to be involving linking out to another data source completely and then linking that up with Google Analytics. And that's the other great thing about Tableau, is Tableau allows you to have connectors to multiple different types of data sets living in very different types of servers. So we're starting to set that up as well.
And what is your overall overarching goal with this project? Is it to sunset some of the Libguides, or is it to clean up, or what is it?
All right, the overall, part of our overall mission is to get librarians more involved in usage data for everything. We want people to sort of be more informed by data as they develop, and they spend a lot of time on things. We want to make sure they're spending time on the things that are actually having an impact. So we want people to start live with this data more regularly. So on an ongoing basis, monitoring their LibGuides, trying to experiment with new ways of marketing to see how effective marketing LibGuides might be. We're doing a lot of things on the back end to help improve that as well. For example, we're trying to integrate it into Classes V2, so we can start to monitor how effective that is by seeing the referral links from Classes V2 and see if people are actually coming into LibGuides from those referral links. So we can track all of that right now set up just with this LibGuide, but we want people to look at their LibGuide usage data, maybe on a semester basis, to say, all right, what should I be thinking about sunsetting? What's working? What's not working? What types of resources are people using? And maybe is there a way to make those more visible?
So what's the system that the Libguides is based on, the new system that you're going to? And I only ask because there's a API for it. There may be opportunity to make that available to the developers to integrate with their applications.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Content management systems or LMS and so on.
Yeah. Well, the platform that we're using for Libguides is something from a product. It's from a company called SpringShare, and they've devised a lot of these products specifically for the library market. So it's basically a web CMS. It's not anything. It's just a CMS, but it's very focused on the library market, and they are starting to open up their APIs quite a bit. There's a lot of API access to that, and that's one of our other data sources that we'll be using to pull data in. But being able to share that data out is really important as well. What's very interesting is Libguides actually had a built-in stats module, but like a lot of built-in stats module, it was very limited. It was not nearly as powerful as Google Analytics, didn't have nearly the level of data that Google Analytics provided, So that's why we wanted to be able to give them access to this. Everybody had access to that stuff, but it was really rudimentary and not at all useful. So.
And just the view of this, right? So you send it to the URL, it's flexible, they have that dashboard set up, Google Analytics, because I had the same issue as send an email with an attachment.
Yeah. This is a lot easier, but also to be able maybe even to integrate it within the LibGuide itself. You know how some websites now you can see stats about the website right within the site? We could integrate it into that. It would even be right there. So anybody can look at it. We're really a big proponent of open data at the library, so we might be thinking about doing that as well. Really tying it very closely together. So people don't even have to remember to go out to a website. They just go to their LibGuide, and they can click on the little LibGuide stats box in it, because it's very easy to set this up.
So I downloaded a free trial of this. It's like a 14-day free trial.
Oh, well, let me say, because we were just at site admin training. Tableau at Yale is it's developing. So if you're interested in this, if you're interested in how this might work in the Yale environment, get in touch with the business intelligence community. They're getting a lot of stuff set up. They have the licensing structure that they're dealing with. They're developing as we go along, as they bring different sites up. I did this project, we're getting set up with that. I did this project completely external to that. You can actually download a Tableau desktop via the Tableau Public interface. There's not a limit. There's not a 14-day limit there. The only reality is you can't save anything unless you publish it up to Tableau Public. So you can do a lot of experimentation with Tableau Public just on its own. So especially if you want to play with Google Analytics data, as long as you don't, if you don't mind saving things up to a public website, keep in mind I have not had a lot of traffic from other people on that website, but it is discoverable. It is discoverable when you put it up there. But if you want to experiment, that's a good way to sort of it's a good way to learn the desktop environment, because you can't save anything, but you can develop really robust reports and do all that configuration work with parameters and filters and really learn the system, follow tutorials just to get acquainted with it. You can do all of that from downloading the Tableau desktop via the Tableau Public interface. But once you want to get set up with real Tableau, get in touch with the business intelligence community. They will tell you who to contact in your area and what you need to do to get started, if it's even possible at this point in time. So I hope I did. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, keep in mind that we'll send out the website for the LibGuide, and this presentation will be available there. So all the resources that I highlighted are there, and I'll also send the link to the Tableau Public site. So feel free to access it, look at it, ask me any questions about it. If you have Tableau, you can download the workbook and see all the back end work that's happening. And you might use it to start your own project. It might be a good way to start with a product that's kind of done already. Just move it over to your own data source. I'm sure that's very possible. Keep in mind there's a lot of customization there because of the data set that I was presenting. I did a lot of customization work, but a lot of the data and filters and metrics are all Google Analytics standard stuff. So you're going to be able to get a lot out of it. You won't be able to refresh the data, though, unless you have my authentication to Google Analytics. So you'll have to deal with the data that you have available, but it could be a good learning opportunity. All right. Well, I think we're out of time at that point. So if you have any other questions, feel free to contact me offline.